Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Before the land acknowledgements are set, I have a statement to make. And I just want to say, as I have said before, that the human rights policy is one of the most important policies that trustees will see. And I agree with the policy, except in certain areas. But considering from what I have heard, my voice is no longer welcome or wanted, and I no longer feel safe on this committee. Therefore, I will be stepping down as chair, and I will leave the meeting. And I hope that the irony of this is not lost on people. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Stone, for that statement. In the absence of a chair at this stage, I think the vice chair is still sitting. We do have later in the agenda the election of the vice chair for this year, but Trustee Barnes, would you wish to start the meeting and go from there, or would you prefer I do?
If we're going to do an election, I think you could just start and do the full election.
Okay. So I'm just going to begin by getting up the land acknowledgement. Just one moment, please.
Do you want me to start it? I have it up.
Oh, Trustee Barnes, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to my files.
No worries. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of Sugog Islands First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territories of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nations. It is on these ancestral lands and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. So in terms of the agenda that was distributed, I think then we'd be looking for an amended agenda. And someone can jump in if I'm procedurally not managing this correctly. But I'm looking for a motion to amend the agenda prior to us accepting it. And Trustee Lindquist, I see your hand.
Thank you, Director Marsh. So I would bring a motion that we hold an election to replace the chair of this committee and to elect a vice chair of this committee. And I further would ask that that be moved into the first spot in terms of priority of this meeting.
Thank you, Trustee Lindquist, for the motion. So for clarity, then we're looking for item 6A to become election of chairperson, and then 6A becomes B and 6B becomes C. So that is a proposed amendment. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Thank you, Trustee Edwards. So now I'll ask, are all trustees in favor with the amended agenda as articulated? Thank you. So it looks like there is support for the amended agenda, and we will move forward with that. Trustee Morton.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I thought I saw your hand up. Was I?
No, I just gave you the check mark to say that yes, I am supporting that.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you very much. So if we move forward then in terms of the agenda, are there any declarations of interest at this time? Seeing none, then we will move to the minutes. The minutes were shared with you from the January 24th meeting. Are there any objections to those minutes as they stand? Not seeing any. I'm taking that as consent that they be passed into the record. And so thank you. We will then move forward with recommended actions. The first item then is the nomination of a chairperson for the committee. We will ask for nominations, either self-nominations or proposed nominations. See who's willing to accept the nomination and go forward if an election is needed. We will give each trustee an opportunity to speak to their candidacy in terms of being chair of the committee. And Trustee Lundquist, I see your hand.
Thank you, Director Marsh. I would like to nominate Trustee Barrett to chair this committee.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Barrett, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I accept the nomination.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other nominations for chair of the committee? I shall ask 2 more times. Are there any other nominations for chair of the committee? And finally, are there any other nominations for chair of the committee? Okay, not seeing any other nominations. Nominations are closed. And Trustee Barrett, congratulations. You're now the chair of the governance committee, and I will very happily turn this over to you if you're okay with that.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Director Marsh. And I'll continue with the agenda, looking for the election of the vice chairperson. So similar to the process, I will open the floor to nominations. Again, self-nominations or nominating somebody else. Trustee Morton?
I would nominate Trustee Trustee Patrice.
Barnes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Trustee Barnes, do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'll ask for further nominations. I'll ask again for further nominations. Second time.
I have my hand up, Trustee Barrett.
Oh, there it is. Sorry. Yeah, it does disappear in your ivy in the back. Trustee Lundquist. I'm assuming, go ahead.
I am going to self-nominate. Thank you.
Self-nominate. Okay, thank you. And I will ask again for further nominations. I'll ask one more time for further nominations. Otherwise, I will consider nominations closed. Okay, thank you. I would actually just look to be able to make sure that we do things right. I'll look for a nomination to close, a motion just to close nominations if I could. Trustee Edwards, Trustee Morton, any opposed? Seeing none, I will now ask each of the candidates in alphabetical order in order to be able to, if they would like, to be able to speak to their nomination. And I'll go first to you, Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I've vice chaired the governance committee in the past, and I've thought it a very valuable and insightful piece looking through our policies and procedures, and hope that trustees will allow me to do that again.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. And next I'll go to you, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. I admit that I had some reticence to self-nominate because I have been stepping back somewhat, but the events of the recent weeks have made it clear to me that we need very strong leadership in terms of this committee because of the importance of the issues that we're grappling with. So my view is, and I'm going to be very clear, I think, I have a great deal of respect for Trustee Barnes, and should she become the vice chair, I'm content with that, to be quite blunt. But I do think that this is where we are grappling with some really difficult and challenging questions, and I feel that I have a skill set that is going to help us navigate that in a reasonable way going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. And I am assuming, Mr. Surjanic, that you have been able to establish a voting process that we can cast our ballots. Good, thank you. I knew we could count on you.
Didn't get a break, right?
Robert, sorry, which one of us is communicating with the chair? Is it me or you?
Yeah, I was going to say I've got it to Nora, so good. It's all good. Oh, Director Marsh. So thank you very much to each of the candidates. Trustee Lundquist, you have been elected as the vice chair of the committee. So congratulations. We're going to go next to item C, 6C, recommended actions. We do have a motion that was brought forward by Trustee Chris Brainy. This is committee, so it does not require a seconder. And so, Trustee Brainy, I'll turn it over for you for the introduction of your motion.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. I'll be very quick. My motion is to have the our human rights and equity policy moved to our standing committee to hopefully move forward from there. If I can speak to this for about 30 seconds. We have a really great policy here. We've had staff that have worked very hard, have aligned themselves with provincial policy, human rights policy. I was very disappointed with the debate and questions that occurred at our last meeting, and just feel that there's some policies that, quite frankly, I think are not really that debatable that should be moved forward. We're not experts in this field as trustees. We have staff that have put a lot of thought into this process, and I just feel that it's time for this to move forward and for us to embrace that at our standing committee. So I'll be moving that. That's what occurs right now. Then, Chair Barrett, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Brainy. And as mentioned, there's no need for a seconder in committee, so the motion is on the floor, and I will look to individuals to speak to it. And Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. So I am speaking against the motion because I think it's premature. And I say this with caution because I don't want there to be any confusion about my commitment to this policy, which is deep and abiding. But I do think that, there are parts of this policy that are not debatable. I agree with that entirely. The elements of, the definitions, the understanding, the legal frameworks, those kinds of things, to me, they are not debatable points at this stage in our history. But that doesn't mean that I'm completely satisfied with this policy. I have concerns about the policy in terms of procedural fairness, natural justice, and the implementation of this policy. I still fear that its size makes it difficult and unmanageable for the average person to actually understand it. And I think that's worthy of discussion and debate. The other thing that I need to say about this policy, which I think might be a less than popular view, but I'm cognizant that I'm at this table as a trustee and only as a trustee, but I can't divorce it from the knowledge that I have. And one of the challenges that I have is I fear that this policy actually is sending messages to people of certain equity-seeking groups about the importance of their equity. And that is a difficult conversation that I think needs to be had. And I don't know that moving it to standing makes a lot of sense because I don't want to see this policy die on the standing table. I want this to go forward. I just want it to go forward in a way that is supportable and sustainable over the long term because of its vital importance to our community. So I understand I'm taking up too much time. It's because I'm struggling with this idea because I recognize the amount of work that has gone into it and I respect that. But I also, I can't pretend that I don't have some concerns about the process-driven parts, not the language parts, not the, I'm not fighting about white supremacy. I believe it exists. I don't believe it. I know it. I know that there is structural inequality. I know that our students and our staff are contending with this on a day-to-day basis. But I know that that is true of sort of social exclusion for other groups as well. And I would like to have a discussion about beefing up some of that in the policy and then being clear on how this policy is to be implemented, because although I understand that we are not operational, if we don't understand the impact of a policy we pass, then I think that we haven't done the job that we've been elected to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Barnes, you did have your hand up.
Yes,
Sorry.
I was. Yes, I had taken it down. I agree with Nikki. I think moving it to standing where we can't get some discussions around some of the procedures is probably too soon. But in no way am I disputing the policy and the fact that we need one and that it exists.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Barrett. I would just like to say that I certainly agree with the most of what Trustee Lundquist said. That's the parts that I did understand. I am not an expert in human rights. There's no doubt about it. But I did think long and hard about this motion because there is definitely some relevance to it. However, I'd like for us to discuss further the policy and procedure around this in the governance committee. So I would at this time not be in favor of moving it to standing. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. And I can honestly say I agree with a lot of the stuff what Trustee Lundquist has said, is that wholeheartedly agree that this policy is needed and understand, fully support what is written in the document. My previous discussions, it's interesting when I talk about ableism, I'm not trying to make it a priority over others. In that what I was talking about was especially ensuring the intersectionality because of the fact I know that if we address around discrimination, around race, and in particular, as far as that's concerned, if that individual is racialized and has a disability, I can honestly say that we don't necessarily will eliminate some of the ingrained things that are happening around ableism within the system because they're ingrained in the organization and the legislation. So I want to make this better for everybody, particularly for the intersectionality. I want to make sure that our policy, we're not going to be perfect. Understand that. We're not going to be perfect, but I also know that the urgency that we need to move it forward. So from my perspective, I want at least one more discussion before we move it on.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Any further discussion to the motion on the table? Trustee Brainy, I'll go back to you as the mover of the motion. Mover of the motion.
I have nothing further to say, Chair Barrett.
Thank you, Trustee Brainy. I will ask that there's a motion on the table that the draft human rights, anti-discrimination, anti-racism policies presented by staff included in the package be moved to the next standing committee meeting scheduled for February 7th, 2022. I'll ask that we go to stadium seating for voting on the motion. Is that okay? Sorry, we'll just use or do you just want to use the check marks? Just give me a nod. That's okay? Okay, so please indicate, trustees, by the use of your reactions, whether you're in favor or against the motion. Okay, I believe that certainly the votes, by counting the votes, that the motion has been defeated. However, I think that if I could, and I don't want to speak for you, Chair Brainy, and you can correct me, I believe that certainly part of the desire to move this forward, Trustee Brainy, is about being able to move this forward, if I'm correct.
Correct.
So, yeah, so there is a need, therefore, to be able to determine, and I'm sure Director Marsh always asks this question at each end of every meeting, so what are the actions out of this meeting then, if we have determined to be able to leave this within the committee to be able to have further discussion? I think we definitely need to give staff some direction on what it is that we want to be able to speak to. We are here tonight. I think that there's an opportunity to be able to perhaps put some framework and boundaries about what it is that we wish to be able to discuss. If indeed we are coming back as a committee, I think it would be important for us to be able to give some direction. I've certainly understood Trustee Lundquist and Trustee Edwards and Trustee Barnes about some of those elements that you've talked about. I'd certainly like to be able to give some direction to staff on what are the next steps in being able to address some of those concerns. So I'm certainly open to ideas or suggestions from trustees and or the committee on how we actually take the next steps. Is it as simple as just having another meeting, or do we want to be able to take time tonight to be able to reiterate some of those concerns? Certainly looking for some direction. Patrice, I see you waving at me. I'll go to you.
I think we're here now. I think we could have some discussion around some of the points that are concerning, so that staff can start responding or looking into what is brought forward by trustees. We might as well start getting it done so we can get it to standing so we can pass this policy. Michael, you're on mute.
So I'm just wondering if there's any objections to be able to actually commence that conversation so we can give some specific direction or raise some elements of concern so we can, if we come back to the next meeting, being able to get some of those addressed. I'm going to go to you, Trustee Lundquist.
Yeah, I have a question and I don't actually know who it's to. So, you know, I've had a lot of sort of personal crises that have prevented me from spending the time with this that I needed to in order to get my thoughts down clearly. Having done so over the course of the weekend and today, I have a lot of thoughts, although I still don't think they're as clear as I would like them to be. And so I'm wondering if there is a process where, is it inappropriate for me to write these things down and send them to someone, you as the chair or someone else? I don't want to do a disservice to this policy because it is at the heart of what we're doing, right? It is the very heart of everything this board has committed to. We've pushed very hard over the last 3 years to start moving forward in a direction that supports equity and that supports the dignity of every student and staff member in our system. And I don't want to do a disservice to it. And I recognize that everybody's been working really hard and we've commented in the past, but I guess I just know that I need a little bit more time than the next hour is going to allot me to do that well. And I think it deserves to be done well. So I'm wondering if there is a process that could give us a little bit more time to do that without trying to delay it further, because I recognize the importance of moving this policy forward.
Yeah, the only thing I might add to that, if I could, Trustee Lundquist, in the sense that that it's probably, the concerns I think should probably be shared with the whole committee, et cetera, not just the one individual, because I think it would be important from that standpoint. But I see our Patrick Cotter's hand is up, so I'll certainly ask you to be able to wade in, Patrick, please.
Just a suggestion, Chair Barrett, for your consideration and for the committee. If Trustee Lundquist or other trustees were able to provide comments in writing for the package, right? So they're not private comments, they would be for the next package. But if they circulated it to staff early, as soon as possible, then we can work on incorporating some of your concerns or addressing the concerns and then everything, the proposed draft and your comments would all become part of the public record.
Yeah, certainly, Patrick, I would certainly agree with you, because from a process standpoint, and I think that was kind of where you were heading, Trustee Lundquist, on being able to put them forward so staff and others then have an opportunity to look at them, as opposed to sharing them prior to the meeting, taking another meeting, discussing them, and then having to come back to another meeting to resolve them. Because I think that would be the intent of where the intent of the motion was there in order to be able to move the process forward. So I think that would be a good idea. Again, just looking at the committee, that we could share and we'll set a deadline in order to be able to have those comments shared with both staff and trustees. And then that would give the opportunity for staff to be able to address at the next meeting. And the next meeting would truly be about addressing the concerns that were raised. If there are no concerns raised, I would suggest then conversation ceases, because this isn't a perpetual conversation that would take place. And to be fair to staff, to your point, Patrick, you would need to be able to understand, and some of them could be philosophical, some of them could be clarification, some of them could be whatever elements. I'm going to go to Director Marsh and then to Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. So my only suggestion there is, depending on the nature of what we're receiving, it might be based on the consultations that we've done. There's actually a reason why we've done it the way we've done it, in which case I think there is probably an enrichment opportunity in terms of sharing those perspectives, and then the trustees, if they feel strongly one way or another, making that motion and carrying some of those adjustments or revisions. Whereas in other instances, it may just be stylistic and a simpler change. So I think we just need to be clear in terms of expectations that staff may not change everything that we receive. In fact, we may get contradictory feedback from the trustees as well. So I just want to be cautious about that expectation, but understand the point that Trustee Lundquist made.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Director Marsh. And in no way are the suggestions coming forward automatic proposals and changes to the policy. They would be could be a response to your point on why you've done the way the things you've done, and they may be greeted with yes, we can include those, or otherwise no, and that I think that's a fair determination and explanation of any of the responses coming in. They are not commandments because they have not been discussed around the table as well. So that's a very fair point. I'm going to go to you next, Trustee Edwards.
Yes, and I was just going to say that I agree totally as far as that process is, because this committee is definitely for discussion. You made a point, Chair Barrett, about the timelines, and considering this policy has gone through some stuff, I'm just wondering, also because of process, that my understanding is that the new bylaws, if they get approved, then it changes the process for this possible policy, that it would go direct to board because we don't need it to go to standing. And I'm just wondering if we could sort of base that we do our meetings and stuff so that it does go, if possible, depending on people's thoughts, that it goes to the February board. February board. If we can manage to do that. If not, I wouldn't want to see it happen any later than the March board, because we really need to move this forward. I'm just looking for people's feedback.
Well, technically, Trustee Edwards, the bylaws, if they changed, would not change until the February board meeting. So in essence, they would still have to go to standing unless they went to, you see what I'm saying? That process standpoint. So, okay. But I think we've got to come back to what a realistic time frame is. for both ourselves and for staff as well. And I'll go to Director Marsh if I could.
Thanks. So I just want to make sure we've got our months straight, because I think if the proposed bylaws get passed by board in February, are they getting passed, or is it notice of motion in February for March acceptance? So then it might be March that the bylaws would come into effect. And then with policies, we've made the commitment previously, it was board standing boards. So it was notice of motion at one board. So potentially, if we do this, I think it would have to go to standing unless we did it after March board, when the new bylaws would be formally adopted. And at that point, then it would be a notice of motion at one board and then accepted at the next one, which I then think takes us to May. So if I'm doing that all correctly in my head, I think that's where we're at, unless there was not a notice of motion. But I think this board has been very committed to that idea of board to board in terms of policies. And correct me if I've done my math wrong there, but I think that's what I think you're correct, Director Marsh, in your interpretation, unless there's a desire potentially to hold a special board meeting where the potential agenda item is the passage of this, because we may not view as a board that May is an acceptable time frame. I'm not going to speak for the board, but we may feel that because of the process, we get handicapped by the process up till that point. So I'm going to go to Trustee Morton and then to Trustee Barnes.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. I'm thinking of a timeline that we want to move this forward, but we also want to give everyone enough time to provide input. So if we were to say 1 week for providing input, and then the second week for any considerations to be made, that would mean our next governance meeting would be 2 weeks from tonight. Would that work?
I'm going to ask that question in 1 second, Trustee Morton, if I could. I just want to deal with Trustee Barnes' piece, and then I'm going to come back to a time frame. So hold that thought if you could. I just want to understand if Trustee Barnes' question is germane to the other piece, and then I'm going to come back. Trustee Barnes?
Thank you. My question was, I think it's important, this is a very important policy, and I don't think we should hold it off until that long. I think we should try and put together a framework by which we can get it passed and in place as soon as possible. We've been going out to consultation and back for quite a while now, so I would love to work with some kind of timeline that brings it forward much earlier than that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to go to Director Marsh and then Trustee Lundquist.
Thanks, Chair Barrett. I don't know if this is out of line or not, but potentially we could share draft timelines at standing with trustees in terms of potential of accelerated plan. And that way tonight we could actually talk more about some of that feedback people want to give us in terms of the policy. And then trustees could give input on that draft timeline of an accelerated one, potentially with a special board meeting in there. And if you're uncomfortable with that, we could certainly then not do it and do as the trustees please.
Yes, and probably it wouldn't be a bad idea, Director Marsh, to be able to at least give you some sort of time frame on when you can expect feedback from trustees, because I think that would serve the basis of the first important step, and then allow you some direction. Trustee Lundquist?
I took my hand down because I think Director Marsh sort of was speaking to what I wanted to speak to, but I would say this: I don't want to delay the process. Like, my request is not intended to delay this in any way, shape, or form. I see the importance of that, so I am wondering if that is an acceptable process, then that works. But I also think that it's completely justifiable to hold a special board meeting in light of the acknowledged importance of this policy and the work that we're doing. So comfortable either way.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, and I'll go back to your suggestions, Trustee Lundquist, the reality is that if we did, for example, send it to standing, it would go standing board to board. So we're still within that perhaps time frame that's not acceptable. So I think buying a couple of weeks, for example, on being able to input may not push out that, with the addition of a special board meeting, might not push that out, further than what the process might do that or might do. Patrick Cotter.
Thanks, Chair Bear. Just, the practice of the board has been to go board to board, and obviously we've respected that. But the bylaws technically require 5 days written notice for a new policy. So we could, even without a special board meeting, so we could do it. We could do it at a regular board meeting, on the basis that we comply with the 5-day notice in the bylaw. And just while the practice has been board to board, it's not enshrined in the bylaw.
Right. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go back to the question, Trustee Morton, that you had raised on what, and to give some direction to staff on what would be a reasonable expectation on seeking feedback from trustees. So, Trustee Lundquist, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, if that's okay.
I deserve to be put on the spot because I'm the one that raised it, but I think it actually will be time saving ultimately, rather than my trying to go through and talk, because I'm a talker. So I'm content with the timeline that Chair Morton has proposed, but I'm also content with something shorter. I will take a day off this week and I will put all of my thoughts down in an orderly way and get them sent in by Friday. But I recognize not everybody has the privilege of that. So I think the week with the weekend to allow people the time to do that might be more fair.
And I'm not, as chair, I'm not pushing any sort of a process of resolution, but I would wholeheartedly support at least being able to have a week, because the weekend is usually when most of us get caught up on those things that the week doesn't allow us time for. So I would suggest that might be an equitable time frame, at least to give us a week. At the close of business day, 1 week from today, so the 7th, I think is the date, is it? 31st, 7th, if I look at my calendar right. So at the end of the business day next week. And then we can work on, Director Marsh, we can work with you on what would be an appropriate time to have a meeting after that. And I think that between, you and then with me is just trying to set the meeting up, can determine what date that would make sense, if that's okay with you.
Thanks, Chair Barrett. That sounds perfect.
And you will come forward, I know, with the kind of a concept of an accelerated time frame as well. But yeah. Okay, Trustee Morton.
I was just going to say that is good decision making. 1 week for us to provide input, and then going to staff and asking them, how much time do you need? And everyone recognizes that we want to speed this process as quickly as we can.
And to Trustee Lundquist's point, actually investing time now could save time later in being able to make sure that we address or not address some of the issues or concerns that we may have. So,
I'm in complete agreement with that.
So any further conversation with regards to the potential time frame that has been suggested? We're really talking a week plus a draft of an accelerated time frame. And would that be fair, Director Marsh, that draft of a time frame might be available for next Monday?
Correct. That would be the plan.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I'm very cognizant of making sure that we have boundaries and time frames, so you don't have to ask the question at the end of the meeting.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So is there any further dialogue, questions with regards to this? Okay, so we're all committing. So what we are committing to as well, no feedback by the end of the business day, then there will be no feedback. So we won't add additional things. We're just going to have to make sure that all trustees, some that are not here, also are aware of that option as well. So, as chair, I'll reach out to make sure. Okay. Yes, Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you. Chair Barrett, just wondering if there would be an opportunity for a supplemental question at the final meeting here, at the end of the couple of weeks.
Yeah, for sure. What I was suggesting is that certainly if there's if there is a suggestion or concern brought forward, it certainly allows us the opportunity to be able to further explore that and question it, fully understand it, engage in it for sure. But what I'm suggesting is not plopping something totally brand new, surprising staff, and then not allowing staff the opportunity to be able to fully work it from that standpoint. That's what more of I'm talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah. Director Marsh.
Sorry, just to clarify, then I know that everyone has until the end of the business day, a week from today, in terms of submitting written comments, but there may be people who were prepared today to seek clarification or give feedback that don't wish to do it in writing. Will they have that opportunity still?
At tonight's meeting, you mean? Certainly we can do that. I have no objection to that if no one else has objection. Sure.
I ask only because if people were prepared to provide some feedback, it will help us in trying to figure out then some of the general themes potentially. And if no one does, that's understandable as well. I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose that momentum.
Nope, that's fair. So just clarifying that, okay, we are moving forward with the written process as described and boundarized. Now, to Director Marsh's suggestion, I'm certainly opening up the floor if there are concerns or things you'd like to verbalize at this point. We certainly have staff and trustees sitting here at the meeting, so I'll open up the floor. Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I did have a couple note things that I had prepared that I wanted to bring forward. So if that's okay, I have notations here, and I can go through. If any other trustees have anything, please let me know, because I sort of have a list. So I'll try and go through as quickly as possible for things. So I'm looking at page 11, 1.4D. Sorry there. So we have where negative depictions of history, accomplishments, abilities, and identity of Indigenous people, Black peoples, racialized people. So I just wondered for clarification there, because when you're looking at especially Black history, there is a fair amount of, if you're telling the true history, there's a fair amount of negative history. So I'm just wanting to clarify that we're sort of telling the true history, not sort of the history that, I don't know how to articulate the question, but Black history is negative history. So I just wondered, when we talk about not sharing negative history, or power in our journey is the negative history. So I'm just one clarification on that.
Okay, yep. I'll go to Director Marsh.
I'll begin, and then there may be senior team, including the Human Rights Advisor, who wishes to jump in. But I think there, actually, what we're getting at is not underestimating the negativity of history, but that we're not presenting a negative history in terms of the bias within that history. And I'm not sure if I'm saying that well. So, for example, I think one example I hear quite frequently when I think about Black history is the conversation about that sense when, it can be presented that Canada, there was the Underground Railway and Canada was the great freedom for slaves, as an example. And so that's a negative depiction of history, because that actually is very narrow view of what actually happened. And so what we would be looking for in terms of making sure that our history is not doing that would be presenting the challenges that occurred and the racism that occurred in Canada for those who experienced it. So then I think the key word there is it's the depictions. And so it's getting at, I think what you're trying to say, Trustee Barnes, is the notion that it is the true history.
Yes.
Versus one that many of us learned when we were actually going through school, which we would now classify as a negative depiction of history because it's actually not valid based on the lived experiences of those who endured it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarification on that. Thank you very much. That one is a little bit of a tongue twister in regards to how that one goes through. So the other page I have is page 15, 3.14. And I realize this part is very operational. So we have in here where we have the director and designate. And I wondered if we might need to expand that or detail who that is. I'm just worried that if you have a group that is not trustful of the education system, and the person that there is putting forward that investigation is the director and designate, I wonder if it might be too narrow a depiction of who is involved in that. So I just wanted, if you wanted to talk to that one a little bit.
Shall I jump in, Director Marsh?
Yeah, if as long as Director Marsh gives you the nod, you can go ahead.
Or Davika? Davika, you have your hand up as well. Go ahead.
Okay.
It's okay, Patrick. You can go ahead.
No, so I think that I can answer, I'll at least answer the legal piece, and then maybe you can talk more about the practical piece. How about that? So I think the intention was there to make sure that we're sort of respecting the governance model. So the board, in other words, dictates that the director and designates, fulfill the policy. And so from a governance standpoint, we were reluctant for the board of trustees to specify who. So, that really, the point being, it's an operational matter. You're directing that it happen, and you're relying on the director to do it in an appropriate way. So I think that's sort of the larger governance piece there, but maybe David, you might want to comment on sort of some of the practical pieces.
Thank you for that. And yes, in the procedure that outlines the process for resolving issues and complaints involving students, it does outline the process that would be used to determine and who would be involved in that decision making. And we've tried to be sort of open and transparent in the procedure to explain what that looks like so that everyone involved in the complaint knows what the process is, who's making the decision, and what the decision is based on.
Okay, I just wondered about that, but I understand the governance piece, but I'm looking at the piece of how it's viewed based on who is representing. So I guess this does give us flexibility to assign according to who might be needed in that. I see head nods, so I'm assuming that's a yes. Okay.
Go ahead, Director Marsh.
Thanks. And I'll just add, within that procedure, it even speaks about an interdisciplinary team. Mm-hmm. So equity would be represented. And so if it's not necessarily just a supervisor, it may be, depending on what has come forward, an interdisciplinary team to really understand the complaint and ensure that we're moving forward in the spirit of transparency and accountability. So did want to mention that as well. It may not just be one individual, and that is contained within the procedure.
Okay, so I'm happy for that, because you mentioned those two words, transparency and accountability. So I just wanted to make sure that we were maintaining those. And now on 3.15, where we have, I think, a little bit of talking about conflicting human rights. I wondered if trustees at all will get a report in regards to some of the complaints or some of the things that have come forward, so that we can kind of understand what is going on in the system, not with details, but just maybe the situations that have come forward, how they were resolved and how they affect going forward.
As an education piece, potentially, Trustee Barnes?
Yes.
Learning opportunity?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you, and through you, if I can jump in. Thank you for the question, Trustee Barnes. And I think through the policy, all of the procedures, as well as the accountability framework, it references that we will be identifying, collecting data, reporting on it publicly through the Board of Trustees around issues. The piece around sort of competing rights is that they wouldn't come forward necessarily. It might, but it doesn't normally come forward as I'm raising an issue of competing rights. It's usually an issue by an individual stating that their rights are being violated. And in the process of resolving it, we might bump up against other people's rights. And so we'll have to figure out how best to convey based on trends, what are some of the issues and the barriers that are coming up through the complaints process, which is identified through the data collection piece and the reporting pieces that are outlined in the policy and the procedures.
Thank you. I think that is an important piece, trends and patterns. So because if we can do that and take out barriers, we'll be a lot further ahead in regards to our human rights policy.
And if I could jump in, Chair Barrett, one more piece, because it was sort of correctly pointed out as being educational, but the policy is much more robust than that. It really builds in an accountability piece so that you're getting the information to make sure that the policy is achieving the objectives you've established in the policy. And so there's accountability built in for you to get that data so you can assess, so there's a public and transparent accountability piece.
Thank you. The other few, some of the other things that I had were just typos that were in the document. I see we're very generous with ands. So we have a lot of ands and and. So we have 3.18 to the second line, related procedures and are referenced in there. That's another one. 3.19B, again, we're generous with our ands in that one. We have service and operational and employment related procedures. 3.20, we had, I think that first line where we have 3.20A, we have welcome and accept. I think that was probably accept in that one. And I think the typo ones I'll probably just email to staff. I think that might be a lot easier in regards to getting that done. Now on page 18, H.
1 second, Patrice. I just see Devika's got her hand up. It may be relevant to the point you raised.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting your flow of thought. Just back to 3.20A and the word expect. That was the deliberate word of the use of expect and not accept, because what we want to try to do is to build environments where we're expecting people from diverse identities to be part of the environment, and so we're designing inclusively from the get-go.
Okay, so I was reading it that welcome and accept. So I was rolling those two in together as welcoming and accepting environment. So thank you for that clarification. The question I have in regards to page 18, H, we have to remove resources that contribute to or perpetuate discriminatory bias, assumptions, stereotypes, and our harm. Are we going to create a process for that can be, so we'll know this is a process, this is a criteria, and what they're judged on in regards to to the piece around resources?
For sure. Human Rights Advisor, if you're comfortable, ask Superintendent Negro maybe to weigh in initially, and perhaps Superintendent Davis will want to expand upon his response, because there's two different pieces, I think, to the work.
Okay.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. We are working on a resource selection policy that is in draft right now and is going to be presented to Administrative Council. It's actually a procedure, not a policy, that takes staff, any educator in our system, through a series of considerations in selecting any type of resource that provides a learning experience to our students. So that would include anything from written texts to field trips to anything on the World Wide Web, any resource. And so that is being developed and will be available to the system shortly.
Okay. So will we see it as well, trustees?
So we're happy to share it with trustees for sure. There is another, though, a policy that does impact trustees. And Superintendent Davis, I'm not sure, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but there you are. Are you okay to talk a little bit about the review, which does involve trustees? Thank you.
Yes, happy to. So we work closely with curriculum in terms of the policy and procedure that we go through in terms of the review of resources. So when curriculum works through the resources in purchasing and looking at resources that are connected to the curriculum that don't, and connected to the human rights policy that doesn't cause harm. When we look through our library resources and the resources in our school, there are policies directly connected to our process by which we review on an annual basis the resources that are in our schools, and any resources that come to our attention that we need to take a look at, and also working interdepartmentally to look at the resources that are coming forward. So that is a policy that we are reviewing along with the curriculum pieces that we will be sharing with trustees.
Okay. Thank you. So that's for new resources coming in and existing resources?
For both. This is new resources coming in, but also through you, Mr. Chair, new resources coming in, but also on an annual basis in terms of resources that exist, connected to interdepartmental with our curriculum department. As well, we work in our Indigenous Education Department to make sure that we are always reassessing and assessing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think that I will probably leave the rest of this I'll mail it in. I'll email it in, and I'll think. The only other question I have, Director Marsh, is we have a fantastic equity team. I know equity is a part of all our superintendents' portfolios, but I'm looking at our human rights policy, which is pretty massive in regards to what we're putting out. And I know this will require a fair amount of change. So that's the other question that you don't have to necessarily answer today. But I'm just wondering, when we talk about change management and change in culture and change in different things, how will we, what resource are we going to have? Because we have over 7,000 staff, we have over 60,000 students, we have parents, we have all of those, and we have a policy that is somewhat new and pretty large. So I'm just wondering, in regards to resources and frameworks and education and all those pieces, what that is going to look like. And we can leave that if you like, or you can start in regards to answer.
Director Marsh, for your last point, Trustee Barnes, Director Marsh will address that. This is the third time you've had a last point, but that's okay. I'll let Director Marsh.
This is my last point. See, I'm even going to turn off my mic. Here I go.
Yeah. Okay, Director Marsh.
That means you can't ask for any clarification of what I say, Trustee Burns. So we have been thinking about this, and as you know, we've tried to, over the past year, start to build the momentum and the knowledge in terms of the human rights policy as well as Indigenous education. And so what we've been doing in terms of when we're talking about our work centrally as the starting point is we've created a system initiatives table, which actually brings together all of the central staff responsible, not just for schools and implementation of curriculum and pedagogy, but also business departments and business leaders. So we've come together as a system initiative to do joint learning about what is most important in all operations of the organization, and articulating very clearly then what came of that was the commitment in terms of human rights and Indigenous rights. So we have been, I think, trying to build that foundation. And from there, we've also started to then engage, in addition to facilitators, coaches, and managers, facilitate administrator understanding and learning, recognizing that they're key individuals in terms of, as well as coaches and facilitators in schools, in terms of being change agents and assisting as we implement change. So over the past year and a half, whenever possible, we've been able to do the grounding pieces of understanding around the key principles of human rights and Indigenous rights. So from there, the commitment of the human rights policy is that every department and every school is going to have a plan in terms of how they're implementing this policy, where the key learning is that they need to do, and where the key accountabilities are for them, either as a corporate department. So for example, we talked the other day about our procurement process. How do we make sure our procurement process understands human rights at the center of it? Because that changes sometimes the criteria in which you're measuring who you're doing business with. And likewise, then in terms of school learning plans, every school is going to have a commitment in terms of a human rights action plan. So I think what we're looking to do is to build out in terms of the understandings, the professional learning, as well as the accountability side of it. There are some things that we feel are quite urgent in terms of some of the work. So we know, for example, resources is a key one, because if we have resources that are reinforcing discrimination and stereotypes, that's problematic and doing harm. So we've been trying to front load a lot of those conversations with educators in terms of that critical piece of the self-reflection questions of professional judgment, and going through questions in terms of, is this an appropriate resource or a material to be using with students? So I think it's multi-pronged, and I see Superintendent Negro may have more to add in terms of what I've said, so I'll turn it over to him as well.
I figured when he turned on his camera, I knew he had something to say. So, Jack.
Thanks. And through you, Chair. I don't want to be overly simplistic about this, but frankly, equity and human rights is everybody's responsibility. And because of that, every superintendent is a superintendent of equitable education, and it has been very carefully named as such by Director Marsh. We are telling our central staff that everyone plays a role in upholding human rights and supporting Indigenous education. And so we're building that capacity system-wide. It's going to take some time, but we're on a good path. And that's how we are positioning this work, that it is everybody's responsibility.
And just one more thing I'll add to, in terms of the work of the equity department, is that we do really see that work and the work of curriculum services merging, so that it's interdisciplinary teams. So I think that's another important shift that we are making in terms of the expertise that everybody has. And I think I've spoken to that one before.
Okay, thank you. Any closing comments on that one, Trustee Barnes? No. Okay. Any further commentaries, etc., with regards to some feedback? Not seeing any further. I have a couple, if I could. One is just with regards to, I know I spoke about this a long time ago, but it actually has become increasingly important with regards to that. And I have to be careful using the term, the Reader's Digest version, because I use the term at work and a lot of people didn't know what I was talking about. So, but which shows some issues with me, but just that element of still having that condensed version, because certainly over the last, last week, some people have emailed me just saying, can you give it to me in a nutshell? And I think that, and I know we talked about this and I know there was a commitment, but I think it's becoming increasingly important in the sense of having that executive summary of what this really potentially means as a methodology on being able to talk about that change management piece that we're talking to. Devika, you had your hand up, if that's okay, Director Marsh? Okay, yeah.
Thank you, and thanks for the question too. And so I think there's two parts of the question, and I was putting my hand up for the first part before you got to the second. But the first part was around the executive summary piece. And so before we launched phase 2 of our consultation process, we did develop, I think it's just over a page and a half, maybe 2 pages of a summary of the policy in plain, simple language, as well as each of the procedures, and a tip sheet, or I guess an information sheet for students and families, both about students' rights, as well as how to raise a complaint. So we did develop those, post them on the website. It was part of the consultation process itself. And alongside that, once we do have sort of the final content of the policy and the procedures ready to go, the plan is to develop additional tools and resources to support whether it's students, families, employees, in terms of how they navigate and how they implement the policy and the procedures. So I think we spoke last time about one of the things that we did to try to reduce the bulk of the policy and procedure package was to take some of the details out of the procedures, and then we would move them into implementation guides on certain topics like the duty to accommodate or how to address complaints.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
So totally recognize that feedback. And, it's interesting because I think we went originally from a 70-page policy to the 11-page policy. This has been, I recognize, I think because we've been listening so intently to what has been important to communities to see in it, that we have struggled with that, doing a disservice to what we heard, to also understanding and making it accessible and the challenge therein. So I suspect we're going to be getting more feedback in terms of streamlining it and some suggestions on how to do that, which we're completely open to. But the other thing I will say is that it's very rare that we bring forward a policy and then so many procedures attached to that policy. And that does make this a little bit different and make it feel more dense. If we think back, for example, to the dress code policy, there was a policy and there was one procedure. This one, because it is all encompassing of so many different elements, has a whole bunch of different policy procedures attached to it, which I think leads to that sense of feeling overwhelmed. But if you're thinking about accessing, for example, the complaints procedure, it is a standalone and it can work alongside the policy. So we hear the need in terms of flow charts and making this simple and helping people navigate it once it is final. But I do think this one is also, and we're open to shortening it where there's that feedback where we think we can do so reasonably. But I do think that this is an unusual one because of all the procedures that go alongside it, as well as the important things that people said that they wanted to see in it. So I think that's kind of the tension we've been working with.
Thank you. I see Trustee Lundquist's hand up.
I'm just seeking some clarification for my own benefit because I don't want to spend a lot of time doing a bunch of work that is unwelcome and not necessary. So when and maybe this is my own deficiency here, and I'm willing to acknowledge that that's possible. I don't think it's probable, but I think it's possible. So my concern is this: most of the concerns that I haven't had the opportunity to write down are actually related to procedural pieces, not policy pieces. And I confess that my background in this particular area is creating some of that. And I don't want to overstep as a trustee, to be frank. So I'm trying to understand where those boundaries are in terms of policy versus procedure, and whether it's appropriate for me to comment on both of those things. And also, is it appropriate? And if it's not, I'm content to hear that it's not and why. But also, is it appropriate for me to make suggestions about other documents that might help in terms of clarification of some of those pieces? Because that is my fear with this. The complexity of it for people is a challenge. We have a diverse community within the DDSB, and I don't mean just in terms of racial diversity or gender diversity. I mean in terms of level of education or knowledge or facility with language or those kinds of things. And some of this is very complex stuff. And so I have some thoughts about that, but I don't want to overstep. So I'm actually looking for some direction because I don't want to waste my time or yours.
Director Marsh.
So Trustee Lundquist, you're right in terms of the governance model that trustees only approve the policy and they don't approve the procedure. But our commitment all along has to bring forward the procedures as well, so that you see the whole package of what we're looking to do, and that we welcome the feedback on the procedure, even though it doesn't need to be approved by trustees. Anything we can do that improves the procedures, we're definitely open to. And I know Trustee Edwards, as an example, in terms of the ableism content, has feedback related to what impacts procedure. And we understand, and it aligns with what we've heard from communities, and it aligns with how we think we can move this forward and enriches what staff have done. So we're definitely open to the feedback. The approval process is just the policy. So I hope that helps clarify.
It does. It tells me that I can go ahead and write whatever I want, and you will take it under advisement, and that's A-okay with me. I just didn't want to overstep and feel like I was interfering in things that were not appropriately within my purview.
Okay, probable versus possible. So, okay. Thank you for that clarification. And just to build a little bit on just my last point, was that certainly understanding that the Provincial Association is trying to build so you want to be a trustee for the upcoming election, and we're trying to absolutely merge the elements of equity, diversity, and human rights into that dialogue in that paper, so that what we look at in upcoming boards is a clear understanding of what the role is. And I think that, attaching that element of what the Board of Trustees is responsible for is an important element of that. It's got nothing to do necessarily with our board, but I think it dovetails in the sense of being able to ensure that the baseline is established. And so therefore, there's an expectation in being able to enter into the role as well. So that's an important element that has come out of our equity and diversity study, and is part of that the whole governance model that we've been working on as well. So, okay. I had nothing further to add at this point. Just looking around the table, if there is any other comments or suggestions for feedback for staff. I'm not seeing any. So considering that we do have the next meeting to be able to determine I think we should probably do a doodle poll because we are saying February, 2 weeks is February the 14th. So important in my life to celebrate that romantic holiday. So we'll put out a doodle poll. Thank you, Robert, for doing that. And we'll select a date. And we should probably
need more time anyway.
Yeah,
and that, romantic. We just may need more time.
Right, and still, Nora, you're in the driver's seat in the sense of the time frame that makes sense. So, so I don't want to anticipate anything, but still, you're in the driver's seat. So, are there any questions, Nora, that you need answered? And Nora, sort of make sure that you have direction.
I think we have our marching orders. Thank you very much.
Okay, just want to make sure. So, seeing that we have concluded the agenda, I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, trustees. Thank you, staff, and appreciate it. And be well, be safe.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, all.